going to do the traditional 5 minutes. All right, hello? It works. All right, first order of business, turn off your surveillance devices. Or at least put them on no ring, okay? I just did mine. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Dan Rockmore, Director of the William H. Newcomb Institute for Computational Science at Dartmouth College. And on behalf of the college, I'd like to welcome you to this year's Donahoe Colloquium, How Technology Will Dictate Our Civic Future, by Dr. Latanya Sweeney, Professor of Government and Technology at Harvard University. The Donahoe Colloquium is an ongoing series of public lectures aimed at increasing awareness of the many important and sometimes surprising places in which computational ideas are shaping our lives. These events are made possible by a generous gift from David, Mickey, and Dan Donahoe in honor of Dan's graduation as a member of the class of 2006. It's a central piece of the larger mission of the Newcomb Institute, whose aim is to support and integrate computational thinking throughout the Dartmouth community. The Institute is made possible through the generosity of Bill Newcomb, Dartmouth class of '64, and a former trustee of the college. Bill passed away last spring, and we continue to mourn his untimely loss. As we say in the Jewish faith, may his name and memory be for a blessing. The Newcomb Institute has proudly supported work in every department and program on the Dartmouth campus. This fact reflects the way in which computational and digital processes have increasingly become central, not only to academic life, but to life itself, including our social and civic worlds. Arguably, one cannot fully function in today's world without a digital doppelganger, as well as an intermediary like your phone that enables you to move back and forth between the real and digital realms, which are no longer well separated. The real world remains messy, a feature or a bug that many, especially so-called futurists, try to remedy by aiming for a so-called frictionless online experience. What we discovered is that in reducing friction, we often give up both agency and rights, knowingly and unknowingly. We shrug our shoulders as we click on unreadable terms of service contracts, hurrying to shop and surf or study, and in doing so, surrender our digital lives to a digital ecosystem that is administered by a confederation of companies that are joined not in a shared moral or human goal, but rather in a common financial one. In that, quote, move fast and break things, unquote, environment, the slowly evolved social and judicial norms that we are used to, that have been grown in our material world, can quickly become irrelevant. And it's the intersection of these two worlds with their very different systems of norms and rules that can be surprising at best and harmful at worst. In the words of today's speaker, quote, data-driven algorithms and technology designers are the new policymakers. No one elected them, and most people do not know their names. But the decisions they make dictate the code by which we conduct our daily lives and govern our country, end quote. That quote is from Dr. Latanya Sweeney, and we are so lucky to have Latanya here today to help us think about this complicated landscape. Dr. Sweeney is the Daniel Paul Professor of the Practice of Government and Technology at the Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard's Department of Government. She is also the XD and Nancy Yang Faculty Dean of Currier House, Harvard College, as well as Director and Founder of the Public Interest Tech Lab and the Data Privacy Lab. And indeed, Dr. Sweeney pioneered the fields of data privacy and algorithmic fairness. Her work on de-anonymizing purportedly anonymized data, sometimes called rehydration, is now considered a classic in the field of privacy. She's a computer science graduate of Harvard University and received her PhD from MIT in computer science in 2001, being the first Black woman to do so. Dr. Sweeney has 3 patents and more than 100 academic publications. She's a recipient of the prestigious Louis D. Brandeis Privacy Award, the American Psychiatric Association's Privacy Advocacy Award, and is an elected fellow of the American College of Medical Informatics. Dr. Sweeney is also a former Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Federal Trade Commission and has testified before government bodies worldwide. This is but a sample of her honors and responsibilities. Honestly, I'm not sure when she has time to eat or sleep. We're delighted and honored that Dr. Sweeney could fit us into her busy schedule. So please join me in welcoming our 2025-26 Donahoe Colloquium speaker, Dr. Latanya Sweeney.
Yeah, I think it's all working there. Thank you. It's great to be here, and I really want to thank you for inviting me. You guys have been amazing. I mean, this is, first of all, I always do enjoy my time at Dartmouth. It represents to me that opportunity as an academic to really come into a community where you're sort of captured, sort of a captured community, to actually think and move forward together. And I just always think that's very special. And of course, people did that in 1956 during the summer here, and they coined the term artificial intelligence, which also brings us back here today as it's had a profound effect on all our lives. I do want to thank you, Daniel, and also Rockmore, and also Christine Ellen for shepherding and inviting me and helping coordinate this visit. I had a fantastic day today. I met with Professor Wiramont and her class on data and bodies, and we had a lot of good conversation. And then I met with some Newcomb Fellows, and then Professor Chang and some of his students with respect to elections. And it ended with Professor Brower with a very exciting conversation on data privacy. I just feel really renewed and grateful for the opportunity to have those conversations. I came back to the room, I redid all my slides to try to bring in some of the examples that we had talked about. So so feel free to join in on those. So, you know, many historians call this the third industrial revolution. It has a start date of 1950s with the invention of the semiconductor. And that, of course, brought us computers and then mini computers, the internet, and pretty much smartphones and all these revolutions that have been revolutions within themselves, like the Internet of Things, and now, of course, the AI revolution. One of the things that makes this revolution different than the first or second industrial revolution is the sheer speed at which the technology is being adopted. That has never been done in history, how sweeping these changes are. No one knows when it will end, and it's already changed how we live, how we work, how we play, and pretty much almost every aspect of our lives. And so it is in this backdrop that we are coming across artificial intelligence. But let's go back a little bit and give ourselves a little context. This is what a camera looked like at the time American jurisprudence was going to decide what were going to be the rules for taking people's photos in public. After decades of wrangling through the courts and public discussions and so forth, it was decided that you can photograph people in public without their consent. So if you see somebody walking around in Hanover or on the Appalachian Trail or something like that, you can take their photo and you don't have to worry about it because you don't need their permission to do so. This is what a telephone looked like at the time American jurisprudence was going to figure out what were going to be the rules for recording someone's conversation. Again, decades of wrangling in courts, a lot of public opinions and issues, and then it was decided that you needed consent to record a person's conversation. Now, in some states, you just need one party to agree. In a state like here in New Hampshire, you need all parties to agree. So we end up with this situation where it's okay to take a photograph of someone in public, but if you want to record their conversation, you need at least one person's permission or all people's permission, depending on the state you're in. In 1983, this thing came to market. Most of you are too young to know what the heck that thing is. Anybody know? I know it says Sony Beta Movie. It's the first consumer device that recorded video and sound, and it was sold in the consumer market. It's kind of a big thing for those of us who remember it. You had to balance it on your shoulder, and then you used one hand. This was the trigger button to hit the record, but it didn't have, there was no autofocus. You had to sit there and focus it manually, and it was quite a coordination thing. If it were on sale today, it would be about $5,000. So in 1983, people forked over that level of funding in order to take videos of their children and vacations and things like that. One of the things that's, and it was really a market success. This is, on the left here is Minoru Morio. He was the vice president at Sony responsible for that product. And he calls, and in the middle of all this success, he calls in the head designer, Yuji Morimiya, and he says, the thing is just too big. I want something you can hold in the palm of your hand, and I want it in 18 months. And Yuji Morimiya, despite being sort of following Japanese culture, okay, I'll do this, is like, there's no way that can be done. You know, he says, you know, the current, if I just try reducing all the pieces, the current is too hot to hold the device in your hand. They didn't even have a microphone that would be small enough. Better yet, the power, battery consumption issues and so forth. But Yuji Morimiya puts himself to the task. Sony threw a tremendous number of resources at this thing. The 18-month deadline came and went, and there was still no change. About 3 months later, though, this thing came to market. It's the Sony Handycam. In fact, if you buy one today, it looks almost identical to this one. And their first ads show it with a woman holding it in the palm of her hand and actually operating it in one hand. So this thing was a tremendous success. It just rained money all over Sony. We couldn't keep them on the shelves anywhere in the United States, or for that matter, anywhere in the world. And if this were a class at the Tuck Business School here at Dartmouth, this would be a classic, and would be the end of the talk. The company has a vision, throws lots of resources in it, technology companies, and does all the innovation needed to make that vision come true, goes to market, it's a market success. But we're not over in the Tuck School of Business. This is a different kind of talk. This is actually where our story begins. What happens when it's widely adopted, and so forth. You see, the Sony camcorder had no mute button. And so with no mute button, it was impossible that if you wanted to use it to record people's photograph, you automatically had to also record sound. And that meant that people were going to have to go to jail. And so there were many examples of people going to jail. I'll just give you two really quick ones. One is in Pennsylvania. A mother strapped one of those to her child on a school bus, and it recorded various atrocities of the school bus driver and a teacher hurling these with respect to the child. She takes the video down to the police department. She says, look, I want them arrested. Look what they did to my child. And they arrest her for illegal wiretapping. Another story happened in Boston. There was a protest happening on the Boston University, right outside the Boston University campus. A bystander had one on the sidewalk, and he's recording a protester being arrested. The police stop arresting the protester. They turn around and they arrest him. He faced 7 years in prison for illegal wiretapping. Now we fast forward to today. The ACLU, Pennsylvania passed a law that every school bus must have a camera on the bus that records video and sound. And of course, the ACLU won us all the right to record police in the service of their duties in public. And those were the cases that it came from. Now, the interesting thing here is not that we changed our laws, but why we changed our laws. We changed our laws because they forgot to put a mute button on the camcorder, something that was a fraction of a penny. And this design decision, we end up having to change our laws. People had to go to jail. A lot of issues had to get worked out. It's not to say that we may not have changed our laws anyway, but we shouldn't be changing it because some designer at Sony forgot the mute button. One of the things that's interesting about technology success is when it works in the marketplace, people copy it exactly. So right after Sony camcorder becomes a success, within 2 years, there were tons of these manufacturers were producing these camcorders. None of them had a mute button. Today, most of us take video using our smartphones. They don't have a mute button either. It's just blind, and even though all it would take is a software update to provide one. And so, and we don't see as many arrests, even though, people are using these videos and may not even be aware of the problem that they're posing. I use these examples of the Sony camcorder and the mute button because, first of all, in Japan, they had different laws. It was okay to record people's video and sound in public. So the idea of the mute button was a problem here in the United States. And so this idea of porting technology, when it's adopted widely, you end up adopting the values. Even though Sony says it was a mistake not to have one, the point is they ended up providing those values here. We end up in changing our laws. I use it as an example of how technology designers really are the new policymaker. Sort of as the quote was said earlier, we didn't elect them. We don't even necessarily know who they are. They make arbitrary decisions in the technology they design, and it ends up dictating the rules that we live by. This turns out to be incredibly important as we move forward in this industrial revolution. A few years later, Sony continued to sell and innovate on the Handycam. They wanted one that had what they called night vision. The idea was in the dead of night, you could still take photographs that were crystal clear. This was the promise of night vision. And the way it worked is it had an infrared light to capture crystal clear photos at night. The problem when you had an infrared light and you take photos during the day with it on is it strips away people's clothes. So all of a sudden the internet was filled of women walking down the street with their clothes removed. You could see their body parts, their tattoos, and so forth. There was no law against this kind of thing, but it shocked the conscience of the American public so much that Sony ended up having to do a massive recall. Their stock prices went down. They probably lost all the money they made earlier. They probably lost on this one example. So this tells us that sometimes these arbitrary design decisions or omissions can actually hurt the company, and that the company will have to adjust back. In other words, society can have such extreme responses that the company has no choice but to sort of fix it. But more often than not, as we go through in time, we're seeing more like the mute button and less like the Handycam, the night vision. Either way, these examples underscore what I call that we don't live in a democracy anymore. We live in a technocracy. And I'll put that out to you to figure out if you think we've gotten there yet. But clearly we're on our way, even if you don't think we are there yet. Now, the term technocracy is not a term I invented, but I am adding a new definition to it. It's the idea of the governance of people through the design of technology. And to what extent is the technology doing the governance? So we'll revisit the term at the end of the talk and see what you think. I've had an uncanny career in this third industrial revolution. When I was a graduate student, it was really clear the world was about to change. You could see the amazing innovations were happening all through the AI lab at MIT and computer science labs at MIT, and it was just like, there's going to be a beautiful tomorrow. Like, technology had no bias, it was cheap, it could be replicated. It was going to give us the better democracy, the better world that had always been our promise. And one day, an ethicist from Brandeis was visiting the lab, and she says, computers are evil. And she was saying lots of other stuff that didn't make any sense whatsoever. Did she not know about the beautiful world that was ahead? And so I decided I was going to fix her thinking. So I sit down with her, we began talking, and we talked for quite some time. And she literally foretold the future. So the year that this is happening is 1997. And she talks about how technology is violating our social contracts. And the technology she's talking about is large hard drives on personal computers, on laptop computers, which, of all things seems so innocent. And also so promising. So eventually we get down to an example. Her example was healthcare data. It was a copy of data that had been made on state employees, their families, and retirees. A copy of the data had been given to researchers and another copy sold to industry. And what she was saying is, look, people could figure this data out. They could blackmail our judges. They could all kinds of things because you know the intimate health information on these individuals. And I said, yeah, well, that's only true if you know who they are, because the data, as you can see on the circle on the left, yeah, it had visit date, diagnosis, and procedures, but it doesn't have their name. And the only demographics it had was their month, day, and year of birth, their gender, and their 5-digit zip code in which they live. So I'm doing a quick calculation in my head. People live 365 days in a year. And the data were 2 genders, and let's say people live 100 years. If you multiply that out, that's 73,000 possible combinations. But I happen to know from some prior work I had done that the typical zip code in Massachusetts had no more than 25,000 people. That meant that that combination of date of birth, gender, and zip code would be unique for most people in Massachusetts. So my argument is completely falling apart. So it turns out William Weld was the governor of Massachusetts at the time. He had collapsed about 2 weeks before I'm having this conversation, or 2 weeks, I should say, before the data were given out. And his information was in the data set. He lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so if the calculation's right, I should be able to figure out which record belongs to William Weld. So I went down to Cambridge City Hall and I bought the Cambridge voter list. In a democracy, there are many times I need to know a list of who are the people who own property. So I need to know real estate holdings. I need to know things about that real estate so that everyone can know that taxes are being applied fairly. Voter registration lists are another one. Who you vote for, total private. That you voted or that you felt, the state felt you were eligible to vote, public. So I go down to the city of Cambridge, I get one of these voter lists. It cost me $20 and came on 2 5¼ floppies. Now when I'm talking to my students and I say it came on 2 5¼ floppies, they have no idea what I'm talking about. But some of Stephen, he's like, what are you talking about? And a couple of them will say, well, I remember floppies, but weren't those little hard things? They were about 3 inches. Anyway, it's that old. But it can't, so that voter list, though, had the same demographics, date of birth, gender, and zip code, along with some voting information and the person's name. And so the idea is if I link these two together on my little laptop at the time, that I could actually put a name to the anonymized data. Of course, it depends on how unique is that mapping. So in terms of William Weld, there were 6 people who had his same date of birth. Only 3 of them were men, and he was the only one in his 5-digit zip code. Date of birth, gender, and zip code were unique for him in the voter data, which made it unique for him in the health data, and I could put his name to his voter record. And so this is more generally called the Weld experiment because it sort of caught on like wildfire as news about it spread widely, because it was one of those moments where you're like, oh my God, yes, we have laptops and we have hard drive space, and all of a sudden the way we were sharing anonymous data or believing it was anonymous wasn't so anonymous anymore. Technology had upset it. Using a model from the 1990 census data, we found that it's not just William Weld, but 87% of the population in the United States is unique based on month, day, year of birth, gender, and 5-digit zip code. Now, as you aggregate date of birth to year of birth and 5-digit zip code to county, notice it doesn't go to 0, it goes close, but there are places like Yellowstone, and you're a ranger in Yellowstone where all I need to know is your year of birth and what county you live in, and gender, and that's all I would need to know that you're unique. So it's still not 0 even at the highest, but at 87%, which was the standard around the world for releasing the data, it certainly wasn't having the same effect. So it was kind of cool to be a graduate student and see laws around the world change on one experiment. One very simple experiment that all of you could do on your laptop, even on your phone nowadays. And it sort of became and it happened exactly the time the United States was debating what was to become known as the HIPAA privacy rule. So the motivation in the HIPAA privacy rule in its original writing, actually cites this experiment as well. And it launched this field. What do we do about that? And how do we go forward? And what are the formal models that launch the field of data privacy? I use this as an example here to remind us all that in some ways, who would have thought there was a downside for our society on just having a laptop with a hard computer, and certainly a large disk space. And certainly nobody's advocating that we don't use it. We have to use it, but we also have to be aware of these side computations and the impact they can have. We also, even though laws around the world changed, policymakers had no idea how to change them. And so as a result, they overfit to this example. Everyone cares about date of birth, gender, and zip code. The fact that other combinations of fields are also unique and also be linked totally escaped the policies, including HIPAA. So one of the things we do is on the data map, we try to keep track of all the places that we have evidence of health data going, for example. And even at the time we had done this mapping, more than half the flows aren't even covered by HIPAA. And even the ones that are covered by HIPAA often risk a lot of re-identification because HIPAA overfits itself to that date of birth, gender, and zip code. All in all, most of the problems of data privacy, though it has launched an area of study, Adam's like right on top of it, and so forth, the reality is we haven't solved most of the problems. And new technologies give us new problems. And so in some ways, privacy was sort of the first big clash between technology and society, and we haven't solved it. It's still up for grabs. So I was to have this unusual life, this unusual opportunity to see one of these things firsthand a second time. So I had just become a professor at Harvard. I'm feeling great with my new fancy office in Segis, and I'm being interviewed by a reporter, Adam Tanner. I don't know if any of you have met him. Adam Tanner is a very aggressive reporter. He's asking a zillion questions. So we were talking about the Weld experiment, and I go type my name into the Google search bar to show him the paper I wanted to show him, and up pops instead an ad implying I had an arrest record. So Adam says, well, forget about the paper. Tell me about the time you were arrested. And I said, well, I wasn't arrested. He says, well, did you plead guilty or innocent? Did Harvard know that you were arrested at the time they hired you? Well, what happened if they, he just goes on and on. And I'm like, I've never been arrested. And so now we spend 2 hours trying to figure out what the heck is going on with these arrest ads. So we type in other people's names. We learn that you have to have it has to be a real person, a person who has a first name and a last name together is what's causing the ads. And then after a while, we notice there are certain other names where you don't get these ads from the same company, implying you had an arrest record. So Adam, who is an Italian American, says to me, I know what it is. It's because you got one of those black-sounding first names. And I'm like, what do you know about a black-sounding first name? And then I type Latanya into the Google search bar, and all these black faces come back looking at me. I type in Tanya in this Google search bar, all these white faces come back looking at me. So clearly there are some names given more often to black babies than white babies, and these ads were distinguishing between this. And the question is why? Why was this happening? And so eventually, to get Adam to shut up and move on, I had to actually pay the money for Instant Checkmate and show him not only did I not have a record, but some of these other Latanyas didn't have any criminal record either, notwithstanding the ad. And some of these other names, there existed at least one of them, of a person with that name, who had a criminal record, even though only neutral ads showed up. And so this led me to do a study. It took a few months to do VPN studies of thousands of names, lookups across the United States. And the reason is the following, that in general, discrimination is not illegal. We are on a college campus. Most of you love taking advantage of your student discounts. As my hair is getting grayer, I'm looking forward to my senior citizen discounts. Discrimination is not illegal, but certain groups in certain situations is protected by law. One of those groups is blacks, and one of those situations is employment. So if Ebony and Jill are both going for the same job, and the potential employer decides to type their name into the Google search bar, and up pops an ad implying Ebony had an arrest even if she didn't, and you don't get this, you get a neutral ad for Jill, That's a disparate advantage if it's disproportionate. Like it can't be just it happened one time. It has to happen disproportionately. So of the 10, eventually I did hundreds of thousands of lookups, but the first round were tens of thousands of lookup. 80% of the time, if your name was given more often to a black baby than a white baby, an ad came up showing as arrest record. And it had to be your first and last name exactly, even though the company didn't have an arrest record in your name. The Department of Justice used what's called the 4/5 rule. 80% is exactly that point where they consider it worthy of a civil rights investigation. So it was the first time an algorithm had satisfied the criteria enough to be investigated by the Department of Justice. And it sort of launched this whole area called algorithmic fairness. For those of us in statistics, yes, it was also statistically significant, but in terms of criteria. So first we have this privacy thing going crazy. Then we've got these algorithms. Well, I should explain how is it that this came to happen. So this is sort of how Google's ad network works. You've got a web page over there with a placeholder that says, I want an ad. And in a fraction of a second that this web page is going to load, they basically do an auction. Which of the bidders is going to get that space? And part of the way a bid worked back then is you would type in the name of what search term did you want to place the ad on, how much you would pay if the person clicked it, and then you give 5 different copies of the ad. And so the idea is the algorithm is trying to make the most money for Google, because showing you the ad doesn't make Google money. What makes Google money is if you click it. And so at first it just randomly would pick, but over time, as you're clicking more and more of the ad, that ad will be showed to you more often than the other ads. And so one of the explanations of what we saw here could be that society was clicking these ads implying arrest for black names more than white names, or it could be that the bias was in the setup itself, right? To what extent did the advertiser just simply themselves make these names bias? So we can model this idea that there's some AI decision-making technology, there's some data that's coming in, and what we were able to do was measure that there was an adverse impact out the other end. When I became a chief technology officer at the Federal Trade Commission, I didn't realize it, but because of what had happened, the FTC had actually investigated. And so let me just say that there were problems with the setup data. That's all I'll say. And they were fined. But I don't know that anyone has checked since for any other group, or even the same group, or the same situation, or even the same advertiser. And so as a result, Civil Rights Act is still up for grabs. Because if nobody's looking for it, if the Department of Justice isn't looking for it, there's no one to enforce it online. This is the third example I'll use, and then we'll move on to other issues around. This is an example from Alvaro Bedoya. Alvaro Bedoya was most recently a commissioner at the FTC. At the time, he and we used to have this tag team talk that we did. We would go around to civil society organizations and advocacy groups and explain to them that the things they care about, the things that they're working to protect, are now happening online. And unless they learn how to see them online, nobody's going to be looking for them, and they're not going to be able to defend. So we give this example that we said, listen, at the time we did it, no one did this. Now there are several places that do it. We say, suppose you have a large database of resumes, and you're going to have an AI decision-making algorithm whose job it is to predict potential employees for you as the employer. So the first time it goes through, it says, yeah, and the employer says, oh, I like these guys. I don't really like those guys. And so it's a learning algorithm. It's learning your preferences. So the next time you ask for a group, it gives you these guys. Anybody see what's wrong with this? Right, they're all young. We have a law against that kind of thing too. So again, we've got lots and lots of resumes. We have an AI decision making. It's really learning based on the internal clicks that's happening by the employer, the potential employer. And now all of a sudden we can't measure it. It can happen, and there's no way for us to know, because the only two parties who are participating in this is the potential employer and the company that's providing them. So, but yet it makes the impact is still the same. We can't we can no longer enforce the Equal Employment Act online. I will spare you, but trust me, I can keep doing this over and over for about 50 laws as algorithmic decision-making is used in some aspect of all these and even more. The point that I'm making there is that those laws, people died for, they fought for. There was huge amounts of debate and discussion around them. People were elected or lost elections based on the issues that they raised. All of a sudden, we can't enforce any of them anymore online, only in a brick and mortar building. That means that every societal value that was really, that made the cornerstone of who we are is kind of up for grabs by whether technology design allows us to know about it or doesn't allow us to know about it and doesn't and violates it. So one of the questions that became dominant is, okay, in the face of that, what can we do to succeed? Like, what can we do to help? How do we stop this trend from going this way? So one way is to look at what happened with the Weld experiment. There was this problem with data. I come along, I do the Weld experiment. Advocates picked it up. They ran it to newspapers. Laws around the world started changing. Voila, we got change. And so this idea of how you do change, we call it the help the helpers process of change. And over the last 10 years, we've taught students how to do this at Harvard, and they've done it extremely well. Their work has changed federal laws, state laws, business practices in the big tech companies. They see a problem, they do an experiment or build some alternative technology. We help them make sure it gets in front of journalists and advocates and so forth. And then it's the journalists and advocates who actually make the change. They do the job that they were sort of already set up to do. It's just now that we're giving them the information or the scientific fact that they need to do that job. So we call it the help the helpers model. And the help the helper model, you can see a lot of these papers. We publish them in a journal called Tech Science. You should feel free to look there. You'll see a lot of world changes have happened from it. I'll just give you two very quick examples. This is work by students who did a study in Oakland, California, and Berkeley. And what they did was they were looking at Airbnb hosts, how much an Airbnb host made. And they found that Asian hosts made about 20% less than white hosts for comparable properties. A similar study had been done in New York City and found that black hosts earned about 12% less. Airbnb sends its lawyers to come and figure this out and investigate, because we go public with this thing and so forth. They come over, they look at it, and so much to Airbnb's credit. Today, if you try to rent on Airbnb, they set the price. That's how they got rid of this problem. They were like, they didn't want that on their platform, and so they just set the price to levelize, is that a word? To level set it for everyone. This is another example. This is work from Max. This was ChatGPT version 3 or something like that. It was very early on, like in 2019 or 2018. And what Max was saying is, look, when Congress wants to, or a regulatory body wants to change a regulation or pass a new law, they go through what's called the comment period. That is, they're opening up to the public, tell us what you think about the law that we're getting ready to change. And those comments are really important because they give the regulatory body a sense of where public sentiment is and what are the issues. And then they'll decide to tweak whatever is being proposed based on it. And Max's point was, well, you know what? We could just flood it with ChatGPT comments. And if we flood it with ChatGPT comments, you can't tell which are human and which are from the bot. And if we wanted to bias it, then we could actually distort public opinion. And so one of the ways we explained this to politicians, congressmen, was we said, listen, if you were getting ready to make a change and you got letters from your constituents, if you got a large batch of letters, 1,000 letters, and they were all in the same format and just a different signature, you know somebody's running a campaign on you. But if you get 1,000 letters and every one of them is different and distinct, is that 1,000 people who are upset with you? Or is it one person who made 1,000 different letters come to you? And you can't tell the difference. So we ended up putting them through a comment server, and sure enough, the regulatory body couldn't figure them out. We tagged them in a way that they were able to pull them out, but this ended up changing the way comment servers work in the United States. So I've tried to convince you now that this question of is this still a democracy or are we in a technocracy has been an overriding question, that every value is up for grabs by the way in which technology is not transparent and its harms can be felt even though but there has to be somebody looking for them and so forth. But if you found a scientific fact and you put it on the table, we could make change. And the students made a lot of changes during those years. But that was against an interesting other side of this coin that was happening at the same time. And it was social media becoming the major way of influence in the United States. And so what's going on? Well, Facebook, first of all, they get their money, they get more money if the content is sensational and can go viral. Similarly for Twitter. And YouTube, also with its recommendations and so forth, easily leads you to non-facts or pseudoscience and other kinds of radical content. And so this idea of misinformation or changing the formula meant that when we put scientific facts out, they easily can become, they don't have the same power that they had with Airbnb and the federal government years earlier. Today, it's much different because the others can run social media campaigns and drown it out or totally make it seem as though it doesn't happen. It's not completely gone or of no use, but it's not the same strength. And it is on this backdrop that generative AI hits us. And so the reason this is important is because generative AI, first of all, it's all about, it learned on all that stuff that got the attention economy, its attention, all the stuff that was viral, all those kinds of things. I was telling someone earlier, in the early days before OpenAI put a filter on ChatGPT, you could see where it learned its stuff from. You could ask it a medical question and it would tell you to drink bleach. Right? And so OpenAI started putting a filter program on it, and so as to stop a lot of that from happening. But it gives you a sense of its origin. The other thing, too, is generative AI is telling you what's statistically likely to be, not what is actually scientifically valid. And the more of this it spouts out, the more our AI sort of enforces beliefs and not facts. So if you look at these images, for example, one question I have, are these real or are these AI? One of them is real. See if you can figure out which one you think it is. Turns out none of them are real, except for this one. But I think you get the point. The point is it has to do with our ability to even detect it isn't as good as it used to be either. And it comes down to what I want to believe. The last thing I'd say about the challenge of generative AI is it's kind of like we're all now entering an echo chamber. So when Max did his work on comment servers, the internet was produced by humans. Now, maybe it was flawed and biased and whatever, but the truth is it was content that came from humans. Every year, the percentage of content on the internet is made by bots. And so within 5 years, within 3 years, some people would say, we will be in an echo chamber where almost all content is just sort of echoing back information from the bots themselves, making truth or anything different than that hard to penetrate, hard to get through. So with that, I would say that one of the things about generative AI is part of our time, brings up the question of truth. And that truth itself is up for grabs. Shared information that we have as a society of what is happening is all up for grabs as well. So what do we do now? Producing scientific facts can help, but it's not the big answers like it was a few years ago. Well, we could abandon all of our laws and values, which is the road we're on right now. Or we could abandon the new tech and nobody's going to take our new tech away, right? Because in many ways, we still want all the benefits of the technology, but we just don't want the harms. That's our real goal. And so There's a lot of movement afoot. If we were in Silicon Valley, as far as Silicon Valley is concerned, this is where we are. You know, it's whatever they can make money on, whatever law it conflicts with, that's what we're stuck with, unless we can figure it out or make something else happen. So how do we get a world that society should enjoy the benefits without the harms? Well, one thing we can do is look back through the examples that we just talked about. So the Sony mute button tells us that the person who's doing the design of the technology can make or break a law. They could just choose to adhere to it, or they could choose not to. Also, the X-ray camera reminds us that if they cross, there are some boundaries that they cross that we won't just abandon the law on, but they're pretty extreme, and does that become the country that we want to live in? The Weld experiment also tells us that sometimes even a subtle shift in technology can have major consequences. Somebody needs to be watching and assessing for that as well. And then these AI decision making, what happens when I can't test whether or not it's doing that? The technology boxes us out from even being able to know about the harm. And scientific facts do play a role. This leads us to a conversation about whether or not we should insist that AI come with warranties and compliance statements. That if you're the designer of an AI system, you're in the best spot to tell us, give us some guarantees. You don't have to guarantee the waterfront, but can you give me 2 or 3 things that you can promise me it doesn't do? Can you promise me it's not going to be biased against women? Can you promise me, can you guarantee that it's not going to break this law or that law? And I think that would be a great start, is being able to force technology designers, forcing them to think about what's the best guarantee they can make, and us being able to hold them to the guarantees that they've made. So with that, I want to just say that the Data Privacy Lab and the Public Interest Tech Lab at Harvard have enjoyed a tremendous run at Harvard. We've had huge impact. But these times are changing. We lost $70 million in the recent conflicts with the administration in Harvard. And so it's clear that it's time for them to graduate from Harvard. So later this year, in a few months, we're launching Techison, which is a kind of a special word across technology and citizen. And the work from the lab and from those labs will continue on as the Techison Institute. And I also have a book coming out soon that's based in part on this talk. But thank you, and I just want to say that I hope you'll be inspired from this talk to also help save the world in whatever capacity your work takes you. Thank you.
Well, we have time for some questions. I think I'll let Latanya.
Sure, I think you have to have a mic, though.
Yeah.
Raise your hand and we can walk.
We have one right here.
You starting here?
Given the idea about having tech companies put warranties and guarantees about what the technology will do, how does that square with, how hard do you think that list is going to be to come up with, given that most of the consequences are unintended consequences of what they're producing?
Right. I mean, Sony may not say, we guarantee you that it's not going to violate your laws about recordings, for example, but they might say something else. So it could be that they're warranting something else. But one of the things that having them do this process is it forces them to think about it. It's a moment in time where you say, what can you say? What are the issues? Because no one knows these problems better than the technology designer. And I cannot tell you how many times in these big problems it comes down to something like the mute button. You could have just as easily done it some other way. But if you do it later, after it's gotten a business model, after it has customers, it's very hard to get them to go back and change it. But getting them to change it when it's nimble and still a design is a lot easier. The only people at the table in that moment is them. And so they're the only ones who can do this. But I left them almost speechless. Well, hold on one second, she's bringing the mic to you.
Hi. Ooh, that's loud. Okay. Thank you so much, first of all, for this talk.
My question might be a bit broad, so I'll just preface that in advance. And so I was wondering, as you kind of discussed in the beginning, that everything's moving very quickly and there's a lot of development happening and people are constantly chasing this state-of-the-art model and just looking towards development, how can we, especially on the student level, work towards ensuring that as this development occurred, like you said, these ideas of what's important and ensuring and guaranteeing fairness are put in place during this development?
Yeah, I would say there are three things. One is, first of all, you are the developer for tomorrow. So, and some of you in about 3 months, you'll be developing in Silicon Valley something. And so as you're doing the development, you can actually say, I'm going to build my new AI model of whatever it is, whatever great idea you have. But you know what? I'm going to say it doesn't violate privacy. I can guarantee you it doesn't violate this privacy. Even that alone is huge because all of a sudden, if somebody else has a competitive to it, you've now made a social value a discriminating piece against it. And it begins to start the conversation, start by examples. Because once something's successful, the others replicate. If one new AI system comes out with a meaningful social value, the others will replicate that. And so that's one really important way that you can help. The other way is also be scrutinous of your experiences. Like, why is this happening to me? One of the things we haven't been able to nail it down quite yet, but one of the things that really irk a lot of students is they make a phone call to a restaurant, and the next thing they know, they're getting ads from the restaurant on their Facebook feed. This really, people find very annoying. We've almost gotten which ad networks are doing that, but being a conscientious observer and letting others know that it happened, even if you're not going to investigate it, is very important.
Hello, I'm Rupa Garizam. I'm the co-chair of the chair of the faculty subcommittee on our AI leadership group. The pedagogy subcommittee on our AI leadership group. Thank you so much for your talk. It would be really helpful to hear your thoughts on how we, as faculty who are teaching the students who are going to be the developers of the future, what do we owe them in terms of the kinds of education we're providing in an environment where they're going to be encountering AI in the workplace?
Yeah, so I was responsible for Harvard's AI program a couple of years ago, and the pedagogy question is huge. It goes everywhere from what are the skills that students really do need, regardless of whether an AI can do it too, to, oh my God, they're going to go into a workplace where they're going to be asked to use an AI. How do we teach them how to use it in a way that's effective? To, oh my goodness, they're going to be developing AI tools. How do they develop them in ways that maintain a sense of social responsibility? All of those, it's just sort of unearthed all of these scabs all at the same time. So I have lots of different answers in that space, or I should say not answers, I have opinions in that space. Everything from sometimes it's going to be a new way of teaching, a new way of test taking, a new way of instilling values in students of what's important. Like, to what extent can I bring the LLM into the classroom and make it a discussant where it's actually going to give me alternative text or alternative perspectives to think about, versus it's a writing class. I need you to learn how to write, and I need you to learn how to write without an LLM. So these are all on the table, and I think as time unfolds over the next two or 3 years, I would imagine you'll see lots of innovations in your classes showing exactly that. I was talking to one of the CS faculty at Harvard over the weekend, and we were talking about, well, you know what, you should probably have a class, programming, using AI to program for non-programmers. Because you can ask ChatGPT to write, I asked ChatGPT to write a couple of years ago, write me a program that plays tic-tac-toe. Perfect. HTML page comes up, plays tic-tac-toe. I asked ChatGPT, write me a web page, a program that plays chess. ah, that kind of exploded all over, ah, right, didn't work. A couple of weeks ago, I asked ChatGPT that same question. I got a game that plays chess. So it's all of a sudden, so these things are evolving, but students still need to learn basic computer programming principles in order to take whatever it gave you and how do you fix it or tweak it, right? And things like that. So there's just a whole, and we still need programmers who actually understand programming completely for new languages and new libraries and so forth. So that question is just packed. I mean, it's a whole discussion all by itself. Oh, we got one hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Great talk. And I especially like your example of to crosswalk the voters database and the medical records, because that's exactly what I do.
Yeah.
I'm a professor. I'm a professor in geography, and my specialty is called GIS, Geographical Information
yeah.
Systems. And my particular area is to use GIS, geospatial analysis, to analyze public health and epidemiology, environmental health. So in this area, the privacy, the confidentiality, the privacy of the patients is a very important critical issue. It's actually become one of biggest trouble, sometimes even bigger than the research question itself.
Yep.
Because there's a term called geoprivacy.
Yeah.
And of course, in my research, the more accurate, more precise the patient's location, the better. But of course, the location is considered to be identifiable information. So in most cases, that information is supposed to be hidden, to be concealed. But that becomes an obstacle in my research.
Yeah.
So I would like to invite, or maybe ask for your thoughts. So for this kind of issue, not only from a personal or a social perspective, but from academic research perspective, from a researcher's perspective, how do we see this kind of issue and how to get around the problem? Because this has really become one of the biggest issues in my research. I want to learn your thoughts from the researcher's perspective on this.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't know that everyone here appreciated the complexity of the problem you just described. So let me give two quick examples so that we can level set everyone, and then I'll answer your question. So this geospatial issue is big. So one way I might want to track everyone is by tracking the pings off your phone. That means I know exactly your phone, everywhere you're going, everywhere you're taking that phone, he knows, I'm not going to pick on you, but he needs to know about it because he wants to know about traffic patterns or whatever it is he's trying to analyze. That's a lot of detail about each of us, right? And it's my phone. So when I'm sleeping at home or wherever I sleep, it knows that's where I spent the night. And it could even say that's my home and then begin to know that about me. It could know lots of information about myself. The second example I'll give where this came back and really smacked everyone in the face was the bounty laws in Texas. So when the Supreme Court changed the law on abortion, in Texas, they made what's called a bounty law, meaning that if you find out a woman had an abortion, you could actually, and you report it, you could get money for that. And so using their GPS data, where did this woman go? Using menstrual apps, did she have her period? And so all of a sudden, you're like, oh my God, apps that didn't seem to have anything that was an issue, all of a sudden had an issue. And GPS played a big role in those the early months of that problem too. So it is a real problem. Now, the good thing is that you're a researcher. And so society has, American society, I always look, so it's not so much what does Latanya want, as much, that's not what guides me, or somehow thinking I know better than anybody else. But what guides me is what did the American public, what did American society say was the right thing to do? And is this the moment we have to deviate and think of something different? Or is it that we just lean into what it already gave us? And what it gave us in the 1960s was institutional review boards. So those people who had the pen of policy in the United States back then said, I can't be sure, I don't have a way of legislating a particular experiment, is it worth it? There are some experiments that it's worth you knowing exactly who everybody is while you're capturing their pings. And there are other experiments where I'm not even sure you should capture pings at all. The data has to be anonymized and maybe you get some statistics or something like that. And that the policy itself can't explicitly state it. So instead, every organization that gets federal funds for research is required to have what's called an institutional review board. The goal of the institutional review board is you give them your protocol, and it is their job to decide whether or not it's worth it or not. So
Darby is actually becoming my biggest enemy.
everyone hates them. No, I mean, I'm serious. They hate me too. So, because, did they make the right decision? Oh, now all of a sudden I've got to talk about how I'm going to keep this data and so forth. I didn't used to get to do my research. I hear you. I hear you. But that's what we have. And unless we come up with something better, coming up with better ways to anonymize GPS data that preserves the things you want to do is another tool that you can bring and get sort of a get out of IRB free card. This is, well, it's anonymous because here's this algorithm I used.
We have a question over here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sweeney. This was wonderful as far as helping us understand the complexities of all these topics. I'm a second-year med student across the street at Geisel, and there is an increasing use of AI in healthcare spaces. I'm getting ready to go into the clinic for rotations, and all our third years and fourth years are telling us about open evidence, for those who don't know, which is an AI system that kind of summarizes medical papers and helps because a lot of medicine is understanding what is the consensus right now. So say if someone goes in with a headache, how do I approach that? And you get a breakdown of based on randomized control trials, this is what you do. But I can think of so many ways, especially from the first part of your talk where we saw that it seems there's input and there's this box that we don't know what's going into or what's happening within. And then you can get all kinds of things coming out. Yeah. I can think of so many ways that could be a problem with medical information, especially since these systems, these AI systems are being integrated into medical systems. Doctors are using them now to record notes, because as you know, if you go to a doctor, they have to record everything for legal reasons, but also for follow-up of care. So I'm wondering, as a med student who's about to be in that space, what are the things that I could, and my colleagues, because I'm going to tell them about this, could be looking out for? And I know it's very hard to predict because we don't know where the future is going, but I'm just thinking if an AI system is integrated in a medical infrastructure or an electronic medical record, there's so many ways that information could maybe be broken down and sold as data, or just moved to the wrong hands, so to speak. We have cyber threats and everything. But is there any way to approach this, especially since the companies that are in charge of these things are operating, like our host said, with the move fast and break things mentality. So basically, do whatever you want. We just want to be the best at AI, so we'll give them free reign. And then they get plausible deniability at the end. But what are things that we in the medical space can look out for to protect patients?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. There's kind of three quick answers there. One is, first of all, AI used in clinical care is in theory, should save lives. Because, Dr. Old as me doesn't know necessarily the latest thing, and the latest thing could save the patient's life. And so being able to have a system that's trying to apply what knowledge is out there in the medical literature that could apply to this particular patient is a beautiful thing. So the older systems that tried to do that were horrible and clunky, and they didn't work very well. And I can imagine LLMs are much better at being able to deliver it. Now, having said that, that doesn't make them right. There's a lot of bias in health data and health knowledge. Everything from who participates in clinical trials and who doesn't participate in clinical trials means that a lot of newer techniques don't work for groups of people. So what happens then? Is the AI going to not recommend that treatment at all? Or is the AI going, so for example, I think people with cancer is a great example of immunotherapy. Almost everyone who participated in the clinical trials were white guys. So if you get, but all of us get cancer, right? And so if you get cancer, they're like, sorry, you're not a white guy. We can't give you the immuno. And they said, well, we're going to do a DNA test. But the DNA test basically is a white guy test, right? And so you don't pass. So does that mean you don't get it at all? It might still work for you, right? We don't know. And so I don't know how the LLM would deal with that. Do they just not tell the doctor at all about the immunotherapy? Do they tell immunotherapy with an asterisk? And so these are questions. It behooves you to do what we have to teach all of our students and ourselves to do, is I can't believe everything the LLM says on its surface. I still got to go check it out. And sometimes one of the best ways to check it out quickly is to ask it the opposite question to what you ask, and then see what it says, to give a sense of whether it's making it up or omitting something. So those are techniques. But this is a very, very important space. The other thing you brought up was, wait, exactly where did that data go? And who's got that data and who uses it? So in theory, it's supposed to be covered under HIPAA in the clinical space. But as you point out, they sign a business associate agreement with the hospital. And so now it's, well, if it goes into their model and is part of their model, does that mean that the patient data can't be sold if they want to sell use of their model? So these are all questions that are definitely to be answered. I had more questions than answers for you, but.
All right, let's thank
Okay, thank you.